Hey everybody, thanks for coming. I'm so excited to introduce you to my friend Erica Keswin. I know most of you on the call, but I'm Aimee Woodall, the CEO of the Black Sheep Agency, a cause-driven brand strategy and creative firm in Houston, Texas, focused around activating people around things that matter. We are doing this, one, because it's an honor that we were included in Erica's book, but also because rituals are especially important to us now after everything that we've been through this past year. Man, I didn't think rituals could get more important to my life, but they have, and we're going to talk about that today. I wanted to start by saying that we are going to give out a few books today. So if there's something that we're talking about and you feel inspired by it, please share it on social media. We're asking you to tag Erica and I on Instagram or LinkedIn, and we are going to randomly pick a couple of people who share to send books to. So be sure and do that. I'd love to tell you how Erica and I met, but first I'd like to introduce you to Erica properly. Some of you may have read one of her books. There are several, but let me just tell you a little bit about Erica to give you the background. Erica is a workplace strategist who has worked for the past 20 years with some of the most iconic brands in the world, as a consultant, as a speaker, as an author, and as a professional dot connector. Her best-selling book, Bring Your Human to Work, which is the first book of Erica's that I read, was published by McGraw-Hill in 2018. Her second book that we're here to talk about today, Rituals Roadmap, The Human Way to Transform Everyday Routines into Workplace Magic, was published in January of this year. Nothing like publishing a book in the middle of a pandemic. Way to go, Erica. And has already made the Wall Street Journal, Publishers Weekly, and USA Today bestsellers list. Congratulations on those accomplishments. Erica's work and insights can also be seen in a number of media outlets that you'll recognize, from Harvard Business Review to Forbes to HuffPo to Oprah Magazine, Entrepreneur, Business Insider, and Fast Company, just to name a few. Erica, welcome. How are you?
So much. I am good. It's so good to see you.
Well, it's great to see you too. I would love to just start by having you tell everyone a little bit about your latest book and what brought us all here today.
Great. So hi everybody. For those who, if anyone's ever written a book, I started writing this book well before I had ever heard of COVID-19. After I wrote Bring Your Human to Work, I started really thinking about some of the trends in the book and what were some common themes around leaders who were creating a more human workplace. And one night over dinner, which ironically was over a monthly dinner that I have with a friend, really a ritual at this Upper West Side, New York City Italian restaurant, it hit me that what many of the leaders were doing, whether they called it that or not, in Bring Your Human to Work, was that they were using rituals as a tool to help their employees feel more connected to each other, to clients and customers, to the brand overall, and even to themselves. And so while I didn't set out to write another book so quickly, let alone in the middle of a pandemic, I just had this idea and went for it. What I will say is that I finished writing the book on March 30th, and I was quarantining in Connecticut with I have 3 teenagers and my dog and my husband. The world was completely turned upside down. And I had some time to circle back to many of the companies in the book, including Aimee, about their rituals and what had changed and how they were leaning in and even adapting many of their rituals. And what I found was that, similar to Aimee, what you said in the intro, both for people personally, but also at work, rituals are even more important during turbulent times. And one of the silver linings for me in the book writing process was that I had a little bit of time between the time I wrote it and the time when it came out just about 6 weeks ago, to write an extra chapter called Rituals in Turbulent Times. And it really highlights how people, adapted and transitioned to these rituals. So I feel really lucky that I was able to circle back and share that. So how we got here today is actually through a black sheep ritual. This was now 2.5 years ago, I got home one day and got a package in the mail. And, who doesn't love getting things in the mail these days? And I open it up and it's this, I wish I had it here with me. I've posted it on my Instagram, but it's this trophy of a sheep. And it said, fuck yeah, on the front. And I got this note from someone named Jess, who I didn't know at all. And it was, dear Erica, we give out these trophies. It's a ritual that we use inside our company. It's called Black Sheep. This is what we do. And we're extending it now sort of externally to people we admire. And so of course, like total goosebump moment, I was like, holy crap, like this is amazing. It's a ritual. I'm in the middle of writing this book Ritual. And of course, my 3 teenagers are like, that's the coolest trophy ever. And I emailed Jess and I'm like, this is so great. I'd love to get to know you all as a company and as people. And then I included them in the book. So that's how we got here today.
Yeah, so crazy, right? I mean, we didn't know you were writing a book about rituals, but I had just read, Jess and I both had just read Bring Your Human to Work, because we are avid leadership book readers, and anything that can help us continue to build and strengthen our culture. And we loved that book. So it was our 10-year anniversary. We have this ritual internally with this trophy. We have one fuck yeah trophy and we pass it around our office. The one rule, this of course was pre-pandemic, the one rule is that you have to audibly pass the trophy. So like there has to be a very loud verbal fuck yeah. Sorry if anybody on this call is offended by that, but I probably say it a few times just to get the point across. But we pass the trophy in-house and anyone can pass it. You just pass it to the person that has, gone above and beyond, had a big moment with a client, supported you internally, whatever it is that just gives you that feeling of, fuck yeah, thank you for supporting me. Thank you for doing that. You had a winning moment. And we passed it around. And so for our 10-year anniversary, we decided let's pick the people that make us feel that way outside the company and mail them. And it, kind of weird because some of the people we had never met, but we were just like, we want these people to know that they've influenced us in some way. So we sent that trophy to Erica. One thing led to another. She happens to be writing a book about rituals. And I think that's the thing about kind of rituals people, we seem to find each other and like feed off of each other. I think like rituals are sort of egoless, and it's kind of a cool thing because you love your rituals so much that you want other people to know about them and share them and kind of find their own energy in them and kind of riff and find their own rituals. And then you want to know theirs, like what's working for you. It's a really powerful thing to share. Anyway, I'm grateful that our ritual brought us to you, Erica, and you became more than just the author of a book that we really liked and now a close friend of the agency. I'd love to hear a little bit about kind of your description of rituals. I think some people hear the term ritual and they think about like someone like dancing around a fire or like some sort of, sacred traditions and things like that, but rituals really run the gamut. So can you tell us, like, as you were writing this book, how the definition of rituals evolved for you and like what do you really think they are?
So my definition of a ritual has three parts. The first is that a ritual is something to which you assign a certain level of meaning and intention around it. The second part is that there's typically some type of repetition. There's a cadence around rituals, something you do every day, every week, every month, once a year. I did a talk during my book launch on MSNBC about inauguration rituals. and how we know that that cadence is every 4 years. The third part really, hadn't thought about it like this until I started the research. The third part is that a ritual is something that goes beyond its practical purpose. And it's a really important part of the definition. So what on earth am I talking about? If I'm sitting here in my office and if the lights go out, if I were to light a candle so that I could see, that's not a ritual. But if I light a candle every day at 4 o'clock to signify the transition from the work day to my home time, and I do it with that repetition, I'm lighting the candle not to see, I'm lighting it because there's meaning and significance around the transition of my day, which for the record, there's many, many people that have been reaching out to me lately talking about these transition rituals because we're all working and living in the same place. So those three things are how I define a ritual. And the way that I began to help companies figure out whether or not they had rituals in their organizations was there's this one question. It took me a little bit of time during the research process, but the question is, I would say to someone, Aimee, like you, okay, Aimee, when do people at the Black Sheep Agency feel most Black Sheep-ish, most Chipotle-ish? And that's how, and all of a sudden the light bulb would go off and it's like, oh, it's during our onboarding. Oh, it's during our weekly passing of the trophy, and again, there's no practical purpose for getting a fuck yeah trophy, right?
Yeah.
But there's real meaning and it connects people back to each other, to why they love to do what they do to your clients. And so that's really my definition and how I began to help organizations unpack what rituals they had in their organizations.
Yeah, it's like sometimes you don't even think about these things as a ritual because they're just so much a part of you. So I think asking the question in that way, I loved as I was reading the book, hearing you unpack that with each person and learning from that as a CEO, what are these things that the people that you're interviewing find so special within their companies? And sometimes they're the silliest things, they're like, they're so maybe simple or maybe like they just fly under the radar because you do them and you don't even think about it. But asking the question in that way, like pulls it up to the surface. And, I want everybody who comes to work at Black Sheep to really, if they were to ask that question, I'm going to ask that question, in fact, but if they were to be asked that question, to have an answer, like, I think that's the most important thing. I wonder how many places you could ask that question and maybe the people that work there wouldn't have an answer. Anyway, let's talk about the 3 Ps a little bit, because I think this is another key element for thinking about rituals and to kind of bringing up the level of their importance. They aren't superficial. Like there is really something substantive to what a ritual means to a person. So can you talk about the 3 Ps?
Sure. So both in Bring Your Human to Work and the Rituals book, I try to share both the stories around what companies are doing around these topics, but also the impact to the business. So sort of both the science and the stories of rituals at work. And so the 3 Ps is an equation that I came up with to highlight there are many, many studies in the book. And this is just a few that highlight why are we even talking about rituals at work? So this is what rituals give us. The first P is that rituals give us a sense of psychological safety and a sense of connection and belonging. The second P is that rituals give us purpose, an opportunity to connect to purpose and values. And you add those 2 Ps together and you get a boost of performance, which is the third P. So what does that mean? From an individual perspective, rituals give us, when we feel more connected, our oxytocin, our feel-good hormone goes up, our cortisol, our stress goes down. And from a business perspective, one study that jumps to mind is that people that work for what we call high trust organizations where you feel like you can be yourself, or you have a sense of psychological safety, collaboration goes up by 47% and productivity goes up by 50%, which makes sense. Like if you feel that you can be yourself and be open and honest in meetings, you're going to share your more innovative ideas. You're going to work together more effectively versus, working to hide, parts of yourself. And so that's why from a business perspective, these things actually make a difference.
Yeah, I mean, we've started recently a new ritual related to meetings, which is one of the things that you address in your book, which I really appreciated, loved. I can't remember who it was, but whoever had the chiming in and chiming out conversation going. I mean, what a great way of thinking about meetings. But someone else within my company started. This is the other thing I love about our organization is that like the rituals that initiate from all corners of the agency, the team. Somebody started a intention setting at the beginning of meetings. And this might sound a little bit like woo woo to some people on the call, but it has made an incredible difference in our meetings. So at the beginning of a meeting, everybody just goes around and we set an intention for the meeting, or we ask something like, what do you think your purpose for being in this meeting is? So everybody goes around, I think I'm here because, and kind of fills in the blank. And surprisingly, it just like centers you, it makes you more present in the meeting. It makes you orient to your function in the meeting. And so I think it's incredibly powerful in like, that's just something that takes us maybe 60 to 90 seconds at the start of a meeting. And it just changes everything. And we get so much more out of the meetings. You have this great quote in the book that I pulled out. Because the 3 Ps work together, it's crucial that we have to elicit a feeling of psychological safety and purpose from the very first touch points in the employee relationship. Doing so will positively impact future performance. From the very first contact with potential hires, we're setting the stage for success. And you have the book organized into sections that talk about pre-boarding, onboarding, onboarding is something we talk about constantly at Black Sheep, offboarding, and then you've got professional growth and meetings in there too, like sort of the middle part of the relationship. I had never thought about pre-boarding. I mean, of course, when you're deep in recruiting, you're thinking about finding the right person, and you're thinking about maybe the stress of recruiting and how much that adds to your workload. You're thinking about, negotiating, you're thinking about all sorts of things, but I had never really thought about the pre-boarding experience and how that might even affect how somebody shows up on the first day. And I really loved that. And then backed by this quote about how the pre-boarding experience might actually impact their performance once they arrive. That kind of blew my mind a little bit.
Yeah. So the way that the book is structured, it's around the employee experience. And, that's why I called the book Rituals Roadmap. The idea is that, you don't have to dive in and try to put rituals everywhere in your organization all at once, but thinking, where are there opportunities for rituals around and across the employee experience, starting in the beginning from pre-boarding and onboarding to meetings, to there's a chapter on eatings, eating together, in person, now even remote. There's a chapter, one of my favorite chapters in the book is called the no smoke break, because breaks are also really important. Sorry, times for rituals. I'm 52, so I was very present and remembered the days of, not that people don't smoke anymore, but hopefully not as much, of the smoke breaks. And it's such a great example because the smoke breaks were about so much more than the nicotine. Taking that break and connecting with your colleagues, you bonded with them, you got to know them, you met, your maybe your future spouse and partner, you met your best friends. And so this chapter is called the no smoke break, because obviously we don't want smoking, but how can we recreate that? I would say around the water cooler, but now we don't even have the water cooler. So there's an example in the book from the company Allbirds where, and I loved, Aimee, what you said, which is that rituals can come from anywhere, top down, bottom up, and the inside out, where a guy at Allbirds went to the doctor one day and wasn't feeling great and decided to set a health goal for himself. And he said, you know what, I'm going to do, a gazillion X amount of push-ups between now and the end of the year. And he divided that number between, the number of days left in the year, and he came up with 40. So he said, you know what, for me to reach my goal, I need to do 40 push-ups between now and the end of the year. And so what happened? He started doing them at work, and then the guy next to him joined, and then the woman down the hall joined. And all of a sudden, everybody at 4 o'clock was stopping to do 40, what became this ritual, 40 at 4. And, it's not that everybody had to do push-ups. Some people watched, some people just chit-chatted. And it was one of the companies that I circled back with during the pandemic. And it was hilarious. They sent me a video. They're still doing it. And everybody volunteers on a different day to make these videos. And one woman was doing squats with her cat and, had a disclaimer that said, no domesticated animals were hurt in the production of this video. But again, it reminds people, like, this is why I love what I do. And and when I asked one of the co-founders of Allbirds, what makes people feel most Allbirds-ish, the first thing that came to mind was 40 at 4. And I just noticed in the chat, Monica mentioned the Friends episode where Rachel starts to smoke, and for those who haven't seen it, she walks up and her boss and the colleague are smoking and she's coughing and they're like, oh, I'm sorry, we're gonna go over here. And then she's missing all the conversation about the new collection. And Monica, I love that you mentioned that because it's actually in my keynote. I have a clip from that episode in the talk that I've been doing all over the place these days. So that's exactly the where, what I'm talking about as it relates to this. There's another chapter on professional development, which are where, the trophies and the rewards. And then the last piece that I think is really important, and it goes to, Aimee, what you said about the chiming in, like the beginnings and endings are what I call prime rituals real estate. How do you begin your day? How do you begin a meeting? How do you begin a project? And also, if you can bookend it with how do you end? And for all of you, we have close to 50 people listening in, think about your own roadmap personally and professionally, and think about some of those opportunities that, connect with your personal values, your company values, and those are great places to start when designing your own rituals roadmap.
Yeah, I think that's a really good segue. First of all, I feel like I'm the only person doing 40 push-ups. I haven't gotten everybody on board with that at our company, but I am definitely doing some things on my own that are getting me through this pandemic. And I know, just kind of looking at the people who are here with us, many of you who I know, some of you I don't, some of you are not necessarily in the position, or maybe don't want to be the person thinking about rituals in your workplace. Maybe you are. Like I said, they can come from anywhere. I think your leadership team might very much welcome the ideas that you have around rituals. So don't underestimate that. But I also just wanted to talk a little bit about how this is so applicable personally and professionally, and how you can be thinking about these things personally. So I thought I would just throw a little bit of a curveball at Erica and ask more about your rituals personally, especially as you've been writing the book. Did you establish any new rituals, especially as all of a sudden we're in the middle of this pandemic and, all of our mental health is compromised? How have you incorporated some of this thinking personally? And then I would love to just share something that's happened to me, which has really helped me get through this past year.
Sure. So I'll share two things. The first is how something I was already doing, sort of how I transitioned it from something that was more of a routine or a habit to a ritual. Because sometimes a great place to start are things that we're already doing. So, I'm a coffee person. Actually, I even went this morning very early. I go to Starbucks whenever I can. The title of Bring Your Human to Work was actually inspired by my Starbucks barista, who I've gotten to know. And there's even a whole chapter dedicated to Starbucks in rituals. I should be a brand ambassador. I'm not. So it really is very authentic. So for years, let's say 15 years, I would go to my Starbucks. I'd get my same drink every time. Pre-pandemic, I would sit in the Starbucks, which I can't wait to do someday. I would have my very high-tech Moleskine notebook and be cranking through my to-do list and feeling like Superwoman, by 8 a.m. One day, and this is a pre-pandemic story, but probably 6 years ago, I realized that I hadn't tasted the coffee. And I was sort of bummed because not only is it expensive at Starbucks, I really enjoy it. And so there was this moment where I intentionally transitioned this action that I was doing every day anyway into a ritual. So what I do now is I get the coffee and I hold it on my hands. I take a few minutes, and rituals can be very connected to our senses. And I hold it on my hands. I feel the heat. I take a couple deep breaths, and I very intentionally taste like the first sip of coffee, and that's it. And that to me was the difference between, it goes back to when you asked me that question, what is a ritual? There's intention, there's meaning. I do it with some repetition. There's, I like the caffeine, but I don't need the caffeine. So there's no real practical purpose. So I wanted to share that because I think there are things that we do every day, whether it's opening the door and feeling the breeze or getting some vitamin D on our skin or taking the dogs out, that we're doing that if we shift it a little bit, could give us a little bit of that opportunity to connect with ourselves. Now, during the pandemic, I always do, one of my things that I do is Pilates every Tuesday at 8 a.m. in person. And all of a sudden I couldn't do that anymore. And my teacher started teaching remotely, and it was interesting. And I do it with one of my closest friends in a time that I can stay connected to her. And we could do it, we weren't commuting. I was no longer traveling on planes, and I could have done the Pilates anytime, but keeping it at 8 a.m. on Tuesdays, there's something about rituals grounding us. And the science shows that it does give us some order out of chaos. And it having those anchors in the course of the week, or having Taco Tuesday with my kids, really gave even my family a sense of that psychological safety and belonging. So I really did feel how these rituals grounded me personally and with my family during this very, crazy time.
Yeah. Yeah, I can relate to the coffee cup holding, because I have this very nerdy ritual every morning where I get out all of my vitamins, but I also get out my kids' vitamins and my husband's vitamins, because my husband's not good about taking his vitamins. And I just it kind of takes about 10 minutes to kind of get it all organized. And then I hand it to each one of them. And it's something so simple, but my husband knows that I love to do it and that it's part of my morning routine, and that it makes me feel like before I have to scuttle off to work, I have taken care of them in some way. I've started the day, I've taken care of them, and now I don't feel as guilty about going to work for some reason. It's just like I've set them off on the right track for the day. And so that's just like one little thing that's important to me every morning. And in the pandemic, I've gotten into yoga, and I was never a class person, or I had a hard time ever doing any sort of online stuff, but I got into doing yoga, and I'm on day 218 of doing yoga every day. I block
Amazing.
30 minutes to an hour for myself every day. And I do it whenever the hell I want to. Like if I have a 45-minute window between meetings, I mean, the nice thing is I have yoga pants on right now. Y'all didn't need to know that. So I can go to a client meeting with yoga pants on. And so I just drop to the mat whenever I can get it. And I put it on my calendar. Everyone on my team knows that I'm doing it if they look at my calendar. And I think, it's hard some days to do it, but I feel like it's worth the investment of time, even though when I first get on my mat, I might think about the 10 or 15 other things that I've got to hurry up and do. I just do it anyway. And it has become such a vital part of my day that if I have a day, I've missed 6 days in the 218 days. And when I don't do it, I feel like something is like, what's off? Something is off. I don't know what it is, but something is off. And then I might realize, oh my God, I didn't get my yoga in today. But, I think
I was going to say, Aimee, that's the definition of a ritual. A piece of the definition is you really miss it. It would feel crazy if it's not there, whether it's your yoga or at Allbirds for 40 at 4, they might think, oh my God, we're not doing it. Did someone sell the company? And so I love that you brought that up because it does show what really is a ritual.
Well, and I think for what's important for me, for anyone who does run their own company or has any influence in like the future of your company, I think one thing that's really important is that I think in cultures of the past or in traditional corporate environments in the past, it has been frowned upon, maybe if you go outside for that smoke break, or if you take a longer lunch, or if you were to go out for a run in the middle of the day instead of being like at your desk being productive. And I believe so much that the workplace cultures of the future have got to embrace what is important to the humans that work for them.
Yep.
And to empower everybody to think differently in terms of how that shows up and when that shows up. Like, if you go do yoga for 30 minutes, you are going to be a better person in the meeting right after that yoga or anything that follows, and probably more productive. And I think there's this moment, this intersection that we're in right now. And I think a lot of leaders are probably struggling with getting there. And I hope that we will start to see culture change and to have this way being more embraced, especially as we're at home. And like we've talked about, the chiming in and chiming out. The chiming in and chiming out used to be the commute. And, that's where you transitioned. You like on your way to work, we're getting mentally prepared to be present there. And then on the way home, you were getting, hopefully, maybe tired, but mentally prepared to be with your family or to exit the workplace. And we don't have that anymore. Now we're lucky if we have a designated work spot in our homes, which is helpful for me. I do have a separate office that I go to at my house, and that like helps me make the transition, but not everybody has that. And so how do we, one, find those entry points and exit points, but then how does leadership and even peers start to understand that there's a new way that this is going to look, and it's not going to be as simple as like an entrance and an exit. There may be lots of entrances and exits throughout the day so that we can be our best selves in our work. I had a couple other questions, but I think I would rather hear questions from the audience while we have the time. So if anybody has something that they want to ask, if you want to raise your hand or pop it in the chat, Erica and I would be happy to address specific questions. And if we don't see any questions pop up, then I'll just keep going with my questions.
I got one as a direct message, which I can read.
Oh, great. Yeah.
How do you create, as a director, how do you create this culture of specific rituals when the overall organization doesn't necessarily embrace it? And it's a great question. And what I found, that rituals are the most sticky when they're connected with your company values. So even if you're in a big organization, I have found that there can be pockets where, one director does something one way, one does it another way. So I'm a big fan of, if you have just 3 people that report to you within your team, ask yourself that question. When do people in my team feel most like, our team? And get the answer to that and say, we might start our meetings this way. I mean, ideally, you can kind of bottoms up and share some of the, science and the data. Some people will say, well, my boss doesn't agree with this. And so I always lead with the ROI. So that would be one piece of my advice. If you want to try to get some of this stuff organization wide, try to lead with some of the, here's why it's good for business. But if you can't make progress, focus on it within your own team, within your, with your clients and with your customers, and you'll begin to see, a direct impact. And I've even seen in some organizations where one team does it, and then all of a sudden people get word, and then it, instead of going up, it almost sort of spreads across. Oh, that's great. And, we're hearing about these different things. And, the way to think about it is with your own little group, do it around how you take breaks, do it around a meeting, do it around having lunch together, and figure out where, which of it is the most sticky. But those are the 2 ways that I would start. There's lots of questions in here. Let's see. How would you introduce rituals as an entry-level person to a culture that could use strengthening? I mean, yeah, that's a great question too. As I said, rituals can be bottom up. I ask people for their advice. Aimee, you said you're going to go back and ask that question to all of your employees. When do you feel most black sheep-ish? And so if you can ask, even sometimes you can find some of the best ideas from people that are new to an organization, that are seeing the organization, not from up here, but sometimes they're more customer facing, depending on your business at that entry level. So I would bring the people at all levels into the fold to have these conversations. I would also say, don't let your ego get in the way. Don't feel badly if you are listening to this conversation and go back and say, you know what, we're going to do 40 push-ups at 4:00 and it doesn't stick. It probably won't, because it's not organic to your organization. And so try something, move on, but really try to get buy-in from the bottom up.
Yeah, I think, as somebody who maybe could be a listener to some of those ideas, I think also, depending on how new you are, I think one thing that can get in the way is if you're super new, it feels like you're just trying to come in and change things. So I would say, to Erica's point about something feeling organic, is start listening for other people who might be hungry for those rituals, or start listening for the opportunities that might be a natural evolution to bring a ritual into the fold. And if you have, depending on the culture, if you have the opportunity to talk to somebody about it, say that you read Erica's book and you're inspired. I think that's one way to maybe point the blame in another direction. Blame it on Erica.
I'll take it.
Yeah. But I think I love hearing from my team about ideas that they have for rituals, because it takes some of the burden off of me. And I don't know the culture that you're in, but that might be the case. It might just be that there's nobody ever had the bandwidth to think about these things that you're thinking about as you came in from a new employee. And I mean, the right kind of leader also wants to listen to a new employee because they have a fresh perspective on what already exists. So don't discount that either. It's hard to respond because I don't know what kind of company you're working for, what the people are like, but those are some ideas for me.
Here's another question I just got, which is, have you seen leaders / CEOs utilizing rituals around communication and connection during the pandemic? It's funny, I was writing, I have a monthly newsletter. I was working on it this morning, and some of the CEOs that I've been speaking to recently have said that their employee engagement is higher than it's ever been. And which is in some ways is counterintuitive, but it gets to this exact question, because those leaders have actually increased the amount of communication they've been having with employees and increasing the amount of transparency. They've been truly bringing their human, they've been sharing the ups and the downs and being pretty open with the craziness that you often think, oh, the CEO, he or she has it all worked out. And so the more that, for those of you listening in who are leaders, whether it's, top of your organization or, even have a small team, the more that you can communicate and be open and be real, the more that your employees that work for you are going to do the same. And the more that you can ritualize it. So one example, it's actually not in the book because it came up after this, but Bill Koenigsberg's the CEO of Horizon Media, and I reference him a lot in the book with some of his rituals around rewarding and recognition. But he shared with me fairly recently, he was actually on my podcast, that he started a new ritual during the pandemic called the Bill Daily, where he sends an email every day. And initially, like the beginning part of it was, let's make sure everybody's safe. Here are some business updates. But gradually it morphed into, what he wished for his employees and ideas. And, I actually spoke to him last week about, we're going to do a fireside chat at Horizon. And he said, he literally teared up on the phone. We were on Zoom, and he shared with me that his dog died, and his dog is, young, like 8 years old, same age as my dog. And the next day he said, I need to share with you my Bill Daily about his dog, and talk about feeling connected to him, as a leader. And, he's doing it because it's who he is as a person. But from a business perspective, for people that say, oh, these rituals are, touchy feely, it makes people, it's human nature, right? We are wired to connect. It makes people feel more connected to him, to Horizon, and people just want to go above and beyond. So sometimes I often say that the soft stuff is often the hard stuff, or even the more important stuff. So building these communication rituals, especially now, and especially as we begin to tiptoe back into the workplace in person, are rituals that are going to be some of the most important going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I love about that story, which I hadn't heard until now, is the vulnerability in it. Not to get all Brene Brown, but vulnerability, I think, is one of the like what you just shared about that. To me, what the people who work with him probably love most is, hey, I'm a human too. I don't have all the answers. Here's what I'm going through, and here's what I want for you. And connecting in that, I think the realness is irreplaceable. I mean, I've had a few moments of weakness and real talk with my team since the pandemic started. And those are the moments that I get the most feedback from my crew. Yeah.
And these rituals, I mean, being real and bringing your human to work, being real, having rituals doesn't have to cost anything. Again, that ROI. I want to respond to this one question on here, which is, what do you do if you don't have full-time employees? How can you create connections when you can't necessarily own specific times? And I think that goes back to something else I was going to share, which is we don't always have to be on Zoom to create these moments of connection. I even talk about in Bring Your Human to Work, matching the message to the medium. And the more that we can mix it up and leverage everything from instant message and Slack check-ins to, being on the good old fashioned phone and maybe going for a walk and talk with someone on your team or even a client, to Zoom, And thinking about the ways to leverage all of these different mediums keeps people engaged. So, for this example, when you don't have full-time employees, I would recommend, having a Slack channel where you can have, people connect on, their favorite drink or their favorite, putting pictures of their pets, or, again, whatever it is that makes your employees feel most connected. I almost might say, even though they're not all full-time, maybe there is 1 hour a month where there is overlap of all of the different part-time employees, or maybe there's a way structurally to build that in. And you don't have to make it mandatory. I mean, rituals, you want to pull people in, you don't want to push them and force it, but maybe there's a way structurally within the calendar to say, here's one time a month, ideally even for 30 minutes, where we all can connect and get to know each other as people. Maybe rotate the time so it's, fits, not, it's not if you have different time zones, but to be strategic about where, when, and how you can do it. Are some ideas, and I'm happy to keep brainstorming if you want to reach out after.
Yeah. And Cammie, hi. I also think, building on what Erica said, because we also have some folks who are contract and we're really building out more of a crew in that department. And I think even when you're having those initial conversations and making it sort of like a pre-boarding or onboarding conversation too, if you establish your rituals, then you can talk about those rituals as you're establishing those more like part-time relationships too. And expressing that it's important to the team that even the part-time employees feel included and, like a part of something, a sense of belonging. And even talking about that in your, like, kind of your interview conversations, or, if they're already on board, I think just having a moment where you open the floor and you're like, hey, we're all separate, we can't be together, what's important to you. At Black Sheep, we do this, we do a happiness survey twice a year, where we ask, it's anonymous, and we ask everyone quite a few questions about every aspect of their work, but there's just an opportunity for them to voice like what they're loving the most, what they need more of, whether that's training or that's like fun or that's a different kind of a client. But also you could think about working in some of those feedback mechanisms and just start by listening to what they tell you they want. I think that like sort of appreciative inquiry of what they want and need and what would make them feel good and what would excite them could be a really good place to start before like trying to guess what might feel good or fun for everybody.
Yeah. One of the things I would add, if there's more questions, I'll jump to those, but one of the things that I think it's important to mention is that, rituals can be used to make the workplace more inclusive, but if we're not careful, it can have the opposite effect. So what do I mean by that? If I talk to someone and I say, when do employees feel most like you, and everything that you do from a culture perspective is around drinking and alcohol, not everybody drinks. If everything is after 6 o'clock, well, that doesn't work for the people that have young kids or taking care of elderly parents. I heard an insane story, Aimee. I can't remember if I mentioned this to you on our pre-call, but I crazy, but I'll say it. A law firm in New York City shared that a bunch of partners started a new ritual during the pandemic where every week they were getting on and they were having a contest to measure their facial hair growth because nobody was going outside, so they didn't have to shave. And all of a sudden they realized that for the one woman partner, that probably wasn't the best ritual or idea. And so, think about, when you want to go back and say, okay, what are some rituals that we can begin to think about in meetings and in breaks? Think about them through the lens of your company values and through the lens of inclusivity. I just think it's something that's so critical to think about.
Yeah. Yeah,
Crazy.
absolutely. Erica, I know we are running out of time and it doesn't, let's see, 1 to 2 more questions if there are some, but in the meantime, I want to ask this to make sure we get this good closing advice from you. What hasn't been mentioned that you would offer as a starting point, whether people are looking to, like Cammie said, create rituals within her company, which includes some part-time and full-time people. Where do people start, whether it's personal or professional? What have you learned from all these amazing people that you've talked to?
Well, on the personal side, I would ask myself, what do you do in your life that makes you feel most like you? And I think that's an amazing place to start in terms of designing your own rituals roadmap. So, Aimee, it sounds like from what you've been sharing right now, it's yoga. And so that's something that you are really prioritizing. I don't miss my daily Starbucks or my Tuesday Pilates. And, thinking about what makes you most like you or your family. And then taking that back to and asking that question about the workplace, and thinking about your company and your priorities right now. If you are, hiring a lot of people right now, focus on rituals around onboarding. How do you make people feel that sense of psychological safety when they've never stepped foot in the office, when they've done all of their interviewing on Zoom? Don't leave it to chance. Or if you're doing a lot right now with clients and customers, thinking about that. And so I would really start with a clean slate and ask yourself those questions. And it really does work. It really does put you on that path to start thinking about ways to incorporate rituals into your life and at work and at home and everything in between.
Yeah, I think that's such an important thing. Like interviewing, I've been obsessing over the interview and especially the onboarding, now the pre-boarding too, but especially the onboarding process, because we've hired a number of people in the pandemic and we are about to hire 3 more. And it's just a different world. One of the things, my amazing chief of staff, who is also our head of equity, diversity, and inclusion, Jen, is on the line right now. But one of the things that she brought up to me was blatantly asking about how does equity, diversity, and inclusion fit into someone's life and perspective, because that's such a priority for us. In the interview, just outright saying, look, this is a priority for us. We have difficult conversations around this. We put this above everything else. Everything goes through this lens. Tell me about how this has shown up in your life. And I think doing that also, first of all, I just did my first round of asking that question as part of the interview process. And it was so enlightening and made me feel really good, because I wasn't trying to figure out how somebody, or guessing or assuming. And I think for rituals too, that could be a great way to understand someone better as you're looking at cultural fit through a screen. But asking, how do rituals play a role in your life? Do you have sort of traditions? How have rituals played a part in your work life before, or especially in the pandemic? How are you managing your life or evolving to kind of stay well through all of this? And maybe even getting some ideas there, but also just getting a look into what might be important to someone as they're joining your team, and thinking about how to reconcile that and use it to build new moments to make them feel psychologically safe and welcome and a sense of belonging, even though they're just showing up as this like little square among a team set of squares, like the Brady Bunch.
Yep.
Okay, well, I think we have to wrap up. I want to make sure that I can tell everybody, if you haven't read Erica's book, I highly recommend it. It's a fast read. I read it in less than a day. which is saying a lot. I've got highlights all throughout my book and got lots of new ideas, even though I feel like we're a ritual heavy company already. So I highly recommend it. You can get it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Porchlight Books, IndieBound, like pretty much anywhere books are sold, you can find Erica. And also she's on social media. If you haven't figured that out yet, I would love for you to share something that you loved about this conversation with us and tag us on social media, and potentially you might get a book surprise in the mail. So anyway, everybody, thank you for joining us. We hope that you got some good ideas out of this and it becomes a jumping off point for you to develop your own rituals. It was great to see all of you. I'm so glad some of you had your cameras on. And we will be doing chats like this to bring you new and good ideas and inspiration throughout the pandemic and beyond. So keep in touch, and thank you so much for being here. Erica, thank you immensely for your friendship, for including us in the book. We are honored. And
oh, and Aimee didn't say, Aimee's actually a ritual rock star in the book. So each chapter I highlight a different person who is just one of my ritual idols. So you're mentioned a bunch of times in here. And it was so amazing how we met, and I cannot wait to, I mean, we've never met in person, which is so crazy. So I'm going to make it down to Texas, or you need to come to New York City.
No, we're going to meet in the mountains because we both love them.
So come to Colorado, where I am right now.
Yeah, I would also encourage everyone, if you do incorporate new rituals or come up with some good ideas, Erica and I would love to hear from you about where this takes you, so that we can continue to be inspired and share ideas. So let's let this be the gift that keeps on giving to all of us. I hope you are well. It was great to be with you for this short time. And Erica, thanks a million for being here and giving us this juicy inspiration.
All right. Take care, everybody.
All right. Bye, everybody.